you, Helen. So, as I mentioned, this session is based on recruitment process and the candidate journey. And we're going to talk about this obviously from a perspective of an external recruiter, an internal recruiter, but also the hiring manager, and the role that everybody plays within having a good process and a robust process when you're hiring, and putting the candidate at the heart of everything we do. Because again, recruitment gets bashed quite a lot from people, especially on LinkedIn forums like that or Twitter, about this agency haven't done this recruiter hasn't done the following, and we want to try and show and develop some ideas and tips to give to you to be able to try and change that. So the planning element, Helen will come into this on the next slide in a lot more depth, but something that I wanted to kind of start off with was, how often does a hiring manager or business actually produce a full plan? So, from the start of the process, from the gap in the job through to the actual offer. Because I think a lot of times we talk about the job description, the CV, they become the most prominent elements of the process. And then it's the interview, and then it's the offer. But have we actually gone back to think, do you know what is the gap? And no two jobs are the same. And for most of you who are on the call, if most are recruiters, I believe, or within HR, you'll know that actually, depending on the situation within a team, a company, things change. Ergo, the person you need will possibly change as well. So when Helen comes out, she'll go through this in a lot more planning. But for me, what I wanted to pose was, how does the process differ for the applicant, the hiring manager, and the recruiter? And I think that from personal experience, there's two different camps of recruiter. The ones that are very much transactional focused, job focused, and then those who are candidate focused. And those who are job focused and transactional focused, what I've found over the years is that they don't have the ability to think or put themselves in the candidate's shoes. This is somebody applying for a job. Now, they may be in a job, they may not be in a job, but for whatever reason, they need to leave or they want to leave. And how often, especially for those who aren't in jobs, do recruiters put themselves in those shoes? And what I mean by that is, I was just saying to Helen earlier, you think about, even anybody, whatever sector, whatever role you're applying for, you see something in the modern day online and you get this lovely, warm, fuzzy feeling. Oh my God, that's the job I want. So you apply on a Monday and you're through the ceiling with excitement. By the time Thursday comes, you've not heard anything. Excitement starts to wane. The little voice in the back of your mind starts telling you you've not been successful, even though you might still be in the running. But it's the lack of communication. From the hiring manager's perspective, they might be doing another job. So, do you know what? I'll put it out to either my internal recruiter or my external recruiter. They'll deal with it. It's not my problem. However, they're the hiring manager. They're the line manager in a lot of occasions. So what part do they play with regard to the gap analysis, or actually having a job description that is in line with the requirement, that hasn't been written by a third party just for the sake of having 20 or 30 bullet points to make the job description look nice? And then the recruiter, what are we doing here? Are we trying to match the right individual? Are we trying to stay in touch with our candidate? Or are they just a pound, a dollar, a yen, a euro sign? And I think that's a question I would ask people to think about. When each candidate you see, is it for the actual doing the right thing for the candidate and the process? Or is it a case of, if I don't place them, I'll get a fee somewhere else? And before I go on to hand over to Helen for the next part, for anyone that's been on the calls, I love my statistics, so I'll continue with them. But what I thought was interesting, most of this is taken through LinkedIn, HubSpot, Talent Lift. But 51% of respondents would be more attracted to a company that had job postings with visual elements. So again, moving towards that millennial Generation Z, making it something that's in kind of two-way. So the process is very visual. Job listings, which include salary, get 75% more clicks. Again, the biggest thing that you probably hear and see, what's the job paying? Can't tell you, don't know. 19% of workers admit to have turned down a job offer after agreeing terms of signing the contract. Now, this we could go into, this could be its own webinar session, but the reason that it's there is about the process, about the planning. What has stopped that candidate accepting that, or sorry, what has stopped that candidate taking that job after they've accepted it? More than 20% of recruiters feel they cannot meet the demands of the best candidates. So why is that? And that's maybe something we could get into the Q&A. So please, if you've got questions or statements you want to make, this is a good time to do that. So I'll now hand over to Helen.
Absolutely. So thank you, Brian. So when it comes down to the actual recruitment process and looking at some more detail around that, too often within an organisation, the recruitment process is perceived as a purely internal process. And what happens is that it's not necessarily thought through all the way. So if you can move through the points, Brian, that'd be great. So some key questions to ask yourself when you're planning that recruitment process from an internal perspective, and this is whether you are an agency and you're asking your client on behalf of your candidates, or whether you are the recruiting manager within an organisation. Some real key questions to ask yourself right up front. And the first one is, what will that process be? Is it going to be one interview? Is it going to be 2 interviews with different people? Is it going to be a psychometric testing process? Will it have will it have an assessment centre? Will it have particular testing that needs to be done? Okay, so next one, Brian. So if you need testing, what testing do you need and why do you need it? One thing that's quite interesting is the amount of places that, and I think it's when organisations get bigger, is that testing becomes part of the process, but nobody can really remember why. It's just become part of the process. But if you're going to have testing in there, make sure you understand what is included within that and why you're doing that. Make sure that's justified. Next one. Who's going to be involved and at what stage? So if it is just one interview, are you going to have more than one person in there? Do you need different department heads? Do you need different people from different teams in there? If it's going to be 4 stages, and it doesn't matter how many stages it is, as long as it's really, really clear at the beginning what that will be. If you need 3 different people from the business involved in those interviews, make sure that you know what stage they're involved in and when those stages are going to be. Now, it might be that you don't get enough applicants, probably not the case in the current market, to be fair. So sometimes there might be slippage on those dates, but having those things put in people's diaries makes a massive difference to how smoothly that can run. Because if you think about that from a candidate perspective, they've been told 3 or 4 interviews because you need different people at different stages. And this has happened where you walk into an interview and somebody quite senior is not there because somebody forgot to put it in their diary. And that has a really big impact on that candidate and how valued or not valued they feel. Next one.
Can I just give a quick example there as well, just of a personal thing that happened to me very early in my recruitment career. I worked for my previous employer. It was about 6 or 7 months in, and a client who I had recruited for previously had called me on a Thursday evening about 4 o'clock and said, I've got a vacancy, a sales vacancy. I need it filled ASAP. That was his exact words. His name was Brett. Never forget these things. And I said, no problem at all. And I remember staying in the office because in those days you didn't have the ability to work from home. That shows you how long it is. So hopefully that gives you my credentials. And I worked till about 9 o'clock that night, speaking to candidates, getting this all done. And I remember before I left the office, I hit send and I sent the CVs. And in the morning when I came back in, I had an out of office from them. Oh, right, okay, I've sent 5 CVs and I called into the company. Oh, he's on holiday for 2 weeks. And I remember the feeling of anger and frustration. And I called the candidates and said, look, don't know what to do. They're off on holiday. I don't know what's happening. And he came back the 2 weeks on Monday and he called me first thing at 8 o'clock and said, right, I'll interview the 5 of them. And I said, look, they're not available. I said, you didn't tell me you were going on holiday. And he said to me quite bluntly, you didn't ask. And I remember thinking about the process there, that actually 5 people, I've not managed that as a recruiter. And I have to say, maybe I was a little bit downhearted when I spoke to them. We may have had 1 or 2, I can't remember who was left in the process, but actually, again, that comms and that understanding of the process is vital. Hence why I wanted just to share that bit of mismanagement from my part.
And the other stage of that, if you've got people involved in that process, when are they going to get the paperwork? So that might be the scoring sheets, the question sheets, the CVs. And this for me is from personal experience. I remember going to an interview many, many years ago where it was an internal interview for the company I was working at. And the interviewer literally pulled their CV off a pile and said, "Oh, checked my name, Helen Farrington. Yeah, okay, right, just a minute," and proceeded to read my CV in front of me. And then look out the window every time I answered a question. The strange thing is I actually got the job, but it was that horrible feeling. You're already nervous and somebody's then reading your CV in front of you is very, very discomforting. So make sure that they've got that way ahead of time so they understand the questions they're going to be asking and they've actually had a chance to do that. If you're having numerous stages, make sure that you've booked the right rooms, the right venues, that you've got somewhere organised to actually hold those interviews as well. Again, the bigger the organisation, the more of a challenge that can be sometimes because rooms get double booked and more senior people come in and take them and all sorts of things. But getting that stuff booked well ahead also gives you a little bit more pressure to get through that shortlisting stage a bit quicker and stop leaving candidates hanging on there, because you know you've got to have those first choice candidates ready for interview at that point, and that you know these people know exactly where they're going, they know where they have to park, where they need to be, they know what time they need to be there, and that information is available way ahead of time, so it isn't causing candidates any stress at all during that process. Oh, my favourite. Who's going to give feedback? And when are they going to give it? I don't let me start on this one ranting properly, because this is my biggest bugbear. Make sure that somebody takes responsibility for giving candidates feedback. If you've got a candidate who might be on their 5th or 6th job application, especially at the moment, the way that the market is, if they've not had feedback, if they do one thing that if they just change that, could completely change how they appeared in their interview, could change their confidence level, what have you. But nobody ever gives them that feedback. They're never going to get any better. And by the time they get a job, they're going to be so demoralised and so unsure of themselves. You're not getting that person at their absolute best. But please, even if it's you weren't successful for these 2 reasons or for this 1 reason, make sure that somebody is responsible for that and they know they're responsible for that. Who's going to manage the process internally, whether that again is an agency or whether that is an internal recruiter? Who is the person responsible for that? They're not going on holiday in the middle of that, and if they do, that they hand that process over to someone else. And my biggest one, I don't think I actually wrote this on here, is if you are an organisation, have you gone through all of your internal candidates as well? Do you know if there are going to be people internally who are going to be interviewed? Because it's only fair to let the candidates know that up front.
I think that's probably a recruiter's question as well, both internally and externally. Are you actually asking the hiring manager, the client, that specific question rather than skirting around the houses?
Okay. That's it. And as you're going through every process of planning the recruitment, put yourself in those candidates' shoes and actually just consider how each of those stages will feel for that candidate. Think about how long those delays will feel for the candidate. Because if you've got a month between stage 2 and stage 3, that candidate might very well get offered a job elsewhere. But just considering that other perspective can make a huge difference to how effective and how efficient your recruitment process is.
Thanks, Helen. So what I want to do, and I've brought this slide up all together, is kind of talk around a little bit. Now, this is what we kind of said at the start, the candidate experience. And unfortunately, at the moment, with what we classify as a downturn market, it's the candidate that loses out, because we have a lot more applications for a job, both internally and externally. So therefore, I think candidates, applicants, job seekers can feel a bit like cannon fodder or pieces of meat. And I want to share just 2 examples. One is an agency, which nobody on this call is from, and one is actually somebody, a business who's working with them. Well, I thought was going to be interviewing one of my private clients. But I have two private clients. One is a very senior project manager who for the last 2 years down in London has been an agency they stay in contact with him asking for referrals, and he does it quite a bit. Now, unfortunately, like a lot of people, he's now in a situation where he needs to find something new. So he contacted the MD of the agency, put CV across, has called in 2 or 3 times to be told, yeah, we'll give you a call if something comes up. So his perception is one of rage, that they've used him to get referrals over 2 years. He's seen nothing for it. And the first time he asks for support, I suppose, all of a sudden they're not available. They're too busy. The perception then is that they're a poor agency, and that's his exact words, based on one very quick, interaction with them. So that's something to bear in mind, that what does that mean for the individual? How does it make them feel emotionally, psychologically? And what will they then go on and do to talk about that agency? The second is even more strange. Someone else I know, they were asked by a COO of a company to apply for a job as a marketing director. So the CEO said, listen, you need to go through the right channel, through HR. Here's the details of the individual, sent the CV on. Got an email from HR saying you've not been successful. So the candidate phoned up to find out what the feedback was, to be told you're not the best candidate for the job. She then said, but the COO has actually asked me to apply. Still no feedback. Now, you think about that, we're going to talk about brand in recruitment in 2 weeks' time. But what is that doing? These are 2 pretty senior candidates. We're going to have an upturn market at some stage, maybe 2021, maybe 2022. But the fact is, we'll go back to a candidate short market. There's no doubt about that, because that's what was happening prior to a global pandemic that nobody could have foreseen. There'll be a day of what some people say, day of reckoning. It sounds a bit biblical to me, but there will be something there where people will remember how they were treated in this experience. And I think it really is worth a case of you as a recruiter thinking about that. What are you doing to implement or to drive the candidate experience? And again, just some numbers for you. 81% of candidates will share their positive experience. So there's your referrals. There's, you don't need to be sitting on LinkedIn or on your, whether it be Broadbean, Logic Melon, whatever you use, the referrals will come. 52% of candidates don't receive any communication in the 2 to 3 months or even more from applying for a job. It's no different to you as recruiters being ghosted. That's what they're getting. They're being ghosted by recruiters. An overwhelming 81% of candidates would generally improve overall candidate experience would be communicating. So as we've talked about at the start, the planning. Now, I'm pretty vocal about this. We live in 2020. We have all mod cons. How in God's name can we not reply to someone? A holding email. You can personalize emails, or you can send actually group emails that look personalized. Why can't we get back to people anymore? It just does not make any sense. 90% of recruiting emails aren't personalized at all. Even better, I've seen emails go out saying "Dear Steve" when the lady's name is Sharon, because it's a cut and paste job. Well, that must make people feel very special. Job applicants who do not receive a job offer are 80% more likely to apply again if they've had a positive experience. Again, bad candidates, they're likely to reject an offer. 63% of them would. And I'll let you read the other 2, but I want to give you an example from Virgin Media. And again, we'll talk about this in the brand because it goes hand in hand. But Virgin Media ran a massive campaign back in 2013-14 to hire a pretty extensive hiring process. Due to the poor process within, and this is public knowledge, by the way, you'll find this online, they lost 18% of sales because people who were with Virgin Media as a supplier who went through this bad experience decided to cancel their package and go elsewhere. So the revenue loss was huge. The brand loss was huge, all because there was no process in place. And again, it comes back to that first slide we showed you. What is the plan? You as the external recruiter, how much are you actually consulting with your client, with the hiring manager, rather than just like, yes, 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 yes. just give me somebody, give me just some sales experience. Fine, okay. Are you being consultative in the approach for the whole thing? As an internal recruiter, exactly the same. Because you work in the same building, you probably have got a better opportunity to go in to see someone. And similarly, if you work in HR and you do recruitment, there's no reason why you're not planning this, that you're using your consultancy element to improve the process. And these stats, it looks like it's a bit recruiter bashing. It's not, because it's not everybody, but this is overall the perception of a candidate. Now, perception is real to somebody. It doesn't matter if you think, well, that's not real because we don't do that. But if someone has that perception as a job seeker, when you are in a candidate short market, what will they do? And I do think it's worth keeping in your mind the Virgin Media example, because what has that done? Okay, it's not ruined Virgin, let's be honest, but when you're talking about losses of thousands and millions in revenue, it does show you what a poor planning scenario, what will entail, loss of revenue, and also not getting good people into your business. So Helen, I'll hand over back to you.
Absolutely, and thanks, Brian. So there is, as we said, it's not difficult in the modern day and age to have so many different methods of communicating with candidates. And just in Eugenie's post chat message there, absolutely, candidates are acting a lot more like consumers now, and they expect a professional and fair process. They expect to go through a structured interview process. They expect it to be timely and well managed and have clear information for them at every stage along the way. They expect a named point of contact, whether that be in an agency or in an internal organisation, somebody within the recruitment team or the HR team, or if it's a smaller business, just someone in the organisation who will answer questions, who will be available to them. And I think the biggest challenge with that is that quite often businesses treat candidates as a kind of inconvenience. They don't see them as potentially the biggest next superstar in their organisation, or as an agency, they don't see them as their products, which is effectively what you are when you go through an agency. And the amount of organisations, and I'm sure Brian comes up against this with his private clients, the amount of organisations that won't let a potential future employee talk to anyone in the organisation about that role, about whether it might be the right role for them or not. So they don't give people a chance to automatically discount themselves because they don't want to work there once they've spoken to them or they've found out more about the job. So that could actually decrease the number of applicants that you're filtering through anyway. And they expect to be given relevant and useful feedback, but quite often that doesn't happen either. And all of the things, if the candidate doesn't get the things that they're expecting, it adds up to a purely negative candidate experience. And they won't want anything to do with that organisation, as that Virgin Media example shows perfectly. But also, they won't ever want to go and work for that company again. And they might not be right for that particular job, but they might be perfect for the next job that comes along. And I had this in my very, very early recruitment days. I wasn't great at getting back to people. It was during another downturn, and we'd had loads and loads of applicants for a particular role. And there was a candidate who'd got to interview, and I hadn't been able to get any feedback from the role as to why he didn't progress to the second stage. And I just I went through that phase and I was awful, and I hid from him for a while, and I'll admit that with a cringe. And many years away, I kind of avoided his calls because I didn't know what to tell him. The most frustrating thing in the world, so he obviously thought I was useless because I was at that point. Later on, probably 3-4 months later, I got another job from this same client who asked me to contact him because he'd have been perfect for that role. And I did say to them, it might be difficult. We didn't give any feedback. And I phoned him, and it was the most uncomfortable call I made as a recruiter, I think, ever. And funnily enough, he didn't want to speak to me. He told me that he was not interested in A, pursuing a job with that organisation again, or B, through me. We have since made up, it's okay now. But it was a horribly uncomfortable call, and he was absolutely perfect. But that was it. absolutely, from his point of view, neither of myself or the client were worthy of his time in future. And to be fair, he was absolutely right. And I think, again, you go back to Yogini, absolutely treating businesses as a consumer, because why would you want to go and work somewhere where they can't even treat you with respect through the process where they're trying to encourage you to go and work for them? Really is a different slant on the whole recruitment process, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's just on that you used to, back in the day when I first got into kind of customer service and sales, so we're talking last century, millennium, you would say people would tell 7 people if you had a bad experience. But with the onset of social media, you can go very make something go viral. You could be talking to thousands, hundreds of thousands of people because of the way you've been treated. And we're seeing that when we talk about LinkedIn, kind of recruiter bashing on LinkedIn. This is because people have a bad experience. So I think it's worth noting that as well, that with that comes a little bit of knowledge that your candidates have power now as well to be able to make comment. So let's go to the next slide. So just to summarize, I think it's about knowing the process that you're trying to achieve and what it looks like. Having a scoring system, we touched on this back in, I think, the last episode about an unbiased scoring system that everyone goes through. Consider it from the candidate's perspective. That's the thing I would probably ask you to think about most, is just what are the candidates going through? What is their current situation? And by not speaking to them or not giving them clear communication or any kind of feedback, what is that doing? Helen, if you want to take the last couple.
Yeah, and I think it's like making sure that everyone's engaged in that process internally, who's going to be, whether they're interviewing, whether they are observing, whether they're actually part of an assessment centre, but make sure that they're engaged, because once they're engaged, the commitment to being there makes it far more likely they'll actually be there and give a really good impression for that candidate as well. If you can get that structured in advance, then candidates can be made aware of that. If you've got a 5-stage process, but a candidate knows at the beginning, they're far more likely to stick around for that process if they really want to work for you. I had this a long time ago where a candidate went in for one interview. It was supposed to be a 2-interview process. I had 2 interviews, and the business said, not quite sure, I just need him to meet this person. So he went along and he met somebody else, and then still can't make a decision. Can you meet this person? So off he went again, because he really wanted this job at this point. And then by the time they came back and said, oh no, we just want him to meet he turned around and said, no, absolutely not. This was supposed to be 2 interviews. This is 4 so far. You can't make your mind up. Clearly I'm not the right candidate for you. So, and he was great. And he went on to work somewhere, one of their competitors, and absolutely flew. And the biggest thing for me, know who's going to give feedback to those candidates or to that agency, and when that's going to happen, so that people can close the door on it. From a psychological perspective, as a candidate, to never get feedback is really, really demoralising. And if that happens in role after role after role, by the time you get that happening a number of times, you've got somebody who is not at their best. They are not the person that they were 5 job applications ago, and that's not good for anybody, because that's not good for you and it's not good for them.
Thank you, Helen. So we'll kind of get everybody to unmute. I don't know if there's any I can't see the question box for some reason. That's what I've been flying around trying to find. But are there any questions?
Yeah, so we've got one from, so if you stop sharing and then we can go into...
I would like to try and do that.
Can you do that? Right, no, it's still sharing. Do you want me to stop you sharing?
Yeah, I don't know why it's jammed. But...
yeah, mine does that sometimes. You lose the top bit. There we go. Everybody back now. Fantastic. Lovely. Yeah, brilliant. Thanks. Hello again, Yogini. Thank you for that. Yeah, so candidates and indeed employees are behaving much more like consumers with specific needs and requirements that they want met. I think organisations need to consider that it's consumers they're dealing with rather than viewing them as applicants. And you're right, internally as well, Yogini. Do you want to add anything to that? Feel free to unmute and join in if you want to.
I think I'm just thinking about, so I've not worked for a year, and some of that was a better choice, and then obviously the world went sideways, and you know, we are where we are. But actually, having spent 20 plus years in recruitment, and then being on the other side of that, and going through that experience, yes, it, you know, and I'm not going to recruit a bash, because I absolutely have always tried to go, well, you know, what is it that they're dealing with? I'm going to be one of several hundred applicants, and you know, you have to kind of find a piece with that, so you understand what you're working through. Otherwise, you're right, it can become so much more demoralizing and much more difficult to get through. But actually, we live in a world where with 2 clicks we can buy something. With a click of a button, we've got access to infinite amounts of information, and that everything you do is driven by that on some level. Whether it's, I don't know, when I was homeschooling my daughter, it was having access to information to help her or whatever. But increasingly, everything's so simple. So why should it be that difficult to get a job, or to get an interview, to have a conversation, to find information that helps you understand you weren't right for that because, or actually what we really needed was someone with, you know, a maths degree rather than a business one, or whatever. Just the clarity and the simplicity of being able to access data, insight, information, a named contact, all of the things that you guys have just said, so someone can make a decision, a snap decision, and move on. Is that right for me? Isn't it? And if you start to treat them like what they are, which are consumers of data, information, whatever, then the way you interact, the way you present that information, the way that you present yourself as a brand, as an employer, you know, that once that dynamic change, and you know, the consumer is king, and if you can't see that with everybody, rather than segmenting them out as that's a customer, that's a candidate, mm-hmm. you're gonna lose. You're gonna lose. I do believe that.
Thanks, again. Any questions from anybody else?
Just on the back of that there, I think that it's definitely right that simplifying your process, and as an example that I've went through in the past myself, that always really frustrates me. I know we sort of touched base on CVs and stuff last week. When a client is going through a process and they've got an internal application you need to go through, the first thing you usually do is upload your CV. You'll usually be prompted to do that. However, then what you find is that a lot of employers have then got a huge big form where you have to then put every single employer, you have to put in all your school education, your college education. You could have left school and done 2 apprenticeships, 2 working apprenticeships and a degree. So there's loads of different other wee certificates. So you could be there for hours and hours filling out this stuff. And I think that employers, I mean, there's a statistic that we used to use at Reed, and I think it was 60 or 70% of candidates will drop out of a process because it's too long. And I think that's the first thing. I know myself, I've looked at these processes and I've seen that I need to fill that out, and I've been like, I don't want the job that much. I don't care. I'm not interested in it, because if that's the first level, what's it going to be like when I get in? So I think simplifying it again would be to the benefit.
And I think, Chris, what's a shame is, and I'm going to generalise here, but a lot of public sector bodies, this is what happens.
Yeah.
I'm working with a young candidate at the moment, and he's applying for things like Network Rail, NHS, one of the water boards. And I tell you what, he's only 23. He would need to get another degree to be able to fill in some of these application forms, because, I mean, he's sending them to me, he said, what do you think? I've never seen this.
Right.
Things that, and it's asking probably questions which I think are really inappropriate. You know, religion, ethnicity. Who cares?
Exactly.
Who cares what his religion or that's irrelevant. It's another thing he's got to actually write into a box. And then you've got a covering letter, and then you've got your CV, and then you've got, and as you say, if that process from the start, when you do gap analysis, and I would always say to anybody here who's at consultant level or billing level, or job level, I should say, really, are you being consultative with your clients rather than just accepting a job description comes across, right, I've sent the job description and it's there? Because that job description may have passed 4 or 5 different hands where everyone's added a little bit of extra on. It's like Chinese whispers. By the time it gets to the end product, it's not what the hiring manager wanted. And I mentioned this in the first episode. I have a friend who was a hiring manager for an insurance company, and he sat with his HR director effectively rowing in front of two of my colleagues because they wanted different things. Now, that tells me the process at the start, no one had discussed that. So she was wanting statisticians, he was wanting mathematicians. And it may seem I'm a layman, I don't know, not the same thing. You kill me for saying that. But the fact is, the process wasn't right at the start. So how could the two consultants fill the job? So again, there's a little bit of almost coaching, of negotiation, of the ability to influence clients, but that goes as well for internal recruiters, to influence your hiring manager. And for me, sometimes that's a bit harder because you're representative of the company as well. And the hiring manager comes storming into your room and says, fill this job for me, would you? Oh, well, let's sit down and discuss it. I haven't got time. Bye. And it's still back to what you're saying, Yevgeny. It's back to the bits of paper are dictating whether people get a job or not. But for me, it's not just the bits of paper, it's actually the process too. So yeah, Chris, I fully agree. It's something that's, yeah, you can see I'm getting wound up.
I'm going to jump in now and shut him up. But it's also when you go through all of that process and they haven't even put a salary bracket on there. And that, I know for me personally, would be like, nah, if I don't even know what you're going to pay me for this, I'm not going to go through all of this trouble.
Definitely.
For something that you come back and go, yeah, it's 15 grand less than we're looking at.
We need to find that out right at the 16th interview.
Aye.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, geez, I could take the rest of the 20 minutes here, but I'm not going to. If you look at my profile, you'll see who I've worked for in recruitment, right? And I'm not going to go into details, but the stories I can tell you about comms, communication, feedback, yada, yada. I was working, as I said before, for a recruitment firm internally for another firm. Now, although I had my clients externally operate as service companies, I also did recruitment in-house, partly for the said firm that I was working under. Now, my background's in project controls. That's where I learned my skills and my niche in terms of who I wanted to recruit for in companies. But I had a team around me who did accounting and bits and bobs. So when, as you say, the finance manager comes to me and says, I'm looking for a junior accountant or accounts assistant, we get to work. We shortlist candidates, we send them to HR to review, and I get told, no, we're not looking for anyone. We don't want any of these people. Oh, okay, Bhavin highlighted to me that you're going to look for one of these people in a week or so. I thought I'd get ahead of the game and see who's out there and see what's going on. Anyway, cut a long story short, HR kicked us out of the process and went and a week later, some of the people I was contacting were walking in the office for interviews. So I'm asking the financial controller what happened here, because I had these people. Oh no, we used to employ for them. We use another company, you know. So instead of using your internal arm, which would be cost effective because it's part of your business, they went external and used different companies. You know what I mean? So that's what I was up against inside a business that was meant to be, you know, working efficient, working smart, but they were going external for, I don't know, it was a fall down in comms, I guess, both ways. They didn't seem to rate what we were doing, whereas we had our own HR and they were HR for the sister company, if you like. So yeah, I get it. But to verse on the feedback piece, I think it's critical, no matter what it is. I had 40 technicians to look for BG across Everest and Lomond assets at one point, and I gave feedback to each and every one. Just a little thing, anything, a snippet of saying why you didn't have that, you didn't have that skills, you didn't have SCADA, you didn't have LVXC, switchgear. Just a little snippet. Improve your training, improve this, improve that. And it only took me a couple of minutes per guy, and I had a bit of time to do it because I had their mobiles. But feedback's critical because then it gives them the nudge to go say, well, that's what I need to do to get to where I need to get to. Yeah? Little things. You know?
I think with feedback as well is if what surprises me quite often is when you've got a 2-stage interview process and there might be something about the candidate that maybe it's just the I do sometimes they might be coming across slightly, they come across very nervous, or they come across slightly overconfident, because sometimes people are nervous and they'll come across overconfident to kind of overcompensate. And that bit of feedback between one set of interviews and a second could make the difference between how that candidate is perceived again by the next stage. And when that's not passed on, that's just ridiculous, isn't it? Because you think this one little nugget could make that candidate an absolute shoo-in for this next stage, for that role. But we won't give them that, because that's giving them that's giving them an advantage or not. It's not. It's, if you give everybody feedback and you give everybody something, then that's equally as fair. It's making sure that this, you came across as slightly overconfident, and because it might be that they are that slightly overconfident person, and it might not fit in your environment. They might not be the right person, but it's letting them have the opportunity to change something between one stage and others that can make a massive difference.
Not thinking, and that's back to what we said last week. This is recruiting in or recruiting out. People who want to recruit out will look for the negatives. People who want to recruit in will look for the opposite. I'm not saying the positives necessarily, but they'll take it more from a neutral plateau. And I think it does come down to that. And you're right. I think that over the years, I mean, I had a client not that long ago, in the last couple of months, who said to me, "Please don't give the candidates any advice on what the interviews will be." So I think we need to give them something to they understand what to prepare for. And I think then when you get candidates who then don't answer a specific question because they didn't know it was coming up, and it might not be something that's based on the actual job description of the company, it may be something that's very left field, which you're catching somebody in the hop. And I think it comes back to that mindset that still a lot of people will look to recruit out. Why I shouldn't take you into my company, then why actually we need you and we can adapt. And we're probably now getting towards back to the bias one as well, which for those of you who have been on the last couple of weeks, you'll see that all of the episodes kind of tie into each other, because that's what recruitment is. And for those of you, it's the first time on, we talked about bias last week based on why people don't hire. And I think this process then adds to that. It's planning versus out and out bias to some extent.
Going back to the feedback and there's a few areas you can come at it, and I guess speed's one, and timing, and too busy. And what do you think? I mean, because when I was in recruitment, I used to think, well, the bigger players, they're going to have bigger revenues to fill, bigger commissions to fill, bigger billing to do because of the overheads, and speed's a thing. Is it because, I'm trying to work out how to say this, but how are we vetting the recruiter getting the job now that he ticks or she ticks the boxes to sit in that firm? Or is it just a case of, this is how we do it? That's a benchmark of how we're going to approach this. But what do you think? Or just sit in the chair, keep making calls to people? And because I see a lot of rubbish still going about. And for me, it's 20 years, the same stuff's coming out, and the same non-feedback, and the same rubbish about I'm getting approached for jobs for planners. I'm not a planner. Do a bit of digging. I recruited for planners, It's just, how is that possible?
So I mean, my view is pretty simplistic on this, because I've been there. I've recruited for consultants, for managers, and for directors. So I've seen where the issues lie. One, we don't work in a vocational industry. Unless you guys tell me otherwise, I've yet to meet someone in recruitment that said, my dream as a little girl or a little boy was to be a recruitment consultant. If that wasn't the case, give me a shout and let me know. But if you think it's not really a vocational degree, most people would freely admit they fell into recruitment, or somebody made them aware of recruitment. So the problem you have is that what makes a good recruiter, and I think this is a great example of what we're talking about in planning. Well, there's not a type that makes a good recruiter. We have, I can talk about Chris, because I was at Reed when Chris came into the business. Chris was a chef. We talked about this last week. Well, on paper, that doesn't work. The guy cooks food. How can he recruit? But actually, he had all this industry knowledge, and the individual has a skill set. That's only one element, I believe, Kev. I believe the second element is, in a lot of companies, and I could be wrong, but a lot of SMEs don't necessarily have the financial element to bring trainers in. So you learn on the job, which is not a bad thing. I think you should learn probably more on the job but you're learning from people who may not be giving you what is best practice. That's one element. Then number two, I've always believed, and this is a personal thing, and please, if you're a recruiter of any of these sectors, don't shoot me, but I always believed that it was really good for in my previous role, for anybody who started off in things like business support and recruiting probably more junior roles. And I don't mean that to be disparaging, but it gave, an administrator has got a set task group, customer service has got the same, and most junior recruiters coming into the industry don't need to then know necessarily what terms are about joint venture accountancy and C#, programming. Chris would be different. Obviously, you came into the industry knowing the terminology, but for those who don't come from industry, they then struggle with that, and they will make the same mistake. NEBOSH diploma, NEBOSH certificate, same thing. It's not. But no one's sitting there. There's not enough going out. There's not enough of a terminology booklet of what this person does. And I think that's been muddied by having such fancy ass titles that we now have. And I wrote my own job description in 2015 and called myself Head of Business Improvement. Lovely title. I'm getting emails on LinkedIn saying, "Hi, do you do Six Sigma? Do you have lean engineering?" I'm not an engineer. I've now seen job titles as recruitment ninja. Yeah. I don't know where you get yourself one of them, but again, I'd like to get one. This is my ninja.
Just get some nunchucks, you'll be fine.
I've actually got two people here. You can't see them because they're ninjas. But the fact is, job titles are changing, and I think that we go back to the planning. If you're looking at hiring for a core skill set, then it's irrelevant of a job title. But I think too many people then go to a stage where the training has been off the cuff, and then they're kind of left to say, okay, now you're recruiting for, scientists. Now I've got a client, and their strapline is they recruit scientists to recruit scientists. So they're going for industry, they don't want me. They want a scientist to do this. And I think that comes down to, if you start on jobs that, customer service, basic sales, admin, you can learn your recruitment, you can cut your teeth. We hear about apprenticeships. Well, no one's going to give me a jigsaw to work on and call me a joiner after a week. But in recruitment, a lot of companies expect a new person to come in and hit the ground running. And I've heard it and I've seen it. 3 months, if they're not making money, well, hold on, 3 months, but an apprenticeship to do something kind of basic is a year. But we don't always allow our recruiters to get that year. So we expect them to be hitting the ground running. And that, I think, then causes its issue when you're looking at stringent KPIs, stringent financials, and from an internal situation, stringent timescales. Whether you're an accruing job or whether you're in an internal recruitment function, we need people now. And, the internal recruiter is not great. They've only given me one of 6, chefs I was looking for. Well, they've only been in the job for 3 weeks. So I think this is a question we could probably debate and rant and think through ideas. But the issue is that a lot of good recruiters leave the industry, and they do. And I've seen it even recently in my old employer. 2 or 3 really senior people have left, and they're not in recruitment or not directly. And I suppose I could probably lump myself into that. I don't do day-to-day recruitment. Obviously very big-headed, thinking that I'm some sort of a good recruiter. I'm sure people would tell you otherwise. But the fact is that people leave, and then what do you replace them with? Because there's no vocation. You don't get a degree. There's no HND, SVQ. It is a case of, my God, this individual has got the ability or the persona, more often than not, to work in recruitment. So I think that's where you have the issue when you get a phone call from somebody. And I always think it's not right to lambast that possible youngster, I would say. And I'm being a bit ageist, but that person that's new into the business, but who is actually managing them, mentoring them, and guiding them to understand the job role.
No, I get that. And I think it comes back to a few other things about, people want it now, they want it now. They want that thing now. No, but you've got to work hard to get to that thing. No, but I want it now. No, but you've got to do 2 or 3 years to get to the, all right. So I've got to learn, I've got to self-invest, and I've got to listen to get, Yes, you can't have it now. You need to wait.
Do you know
No?
what, Ed? It's funny you say that, and apologies for anyone that doesn't like football, but I was watching Sky Sports News yesterday, and they were talking about Ole Gunnar Solskjaer at Man U, and they said if he loses last night's game and he loses the weekend, will he be sacked? And somebody said, well, Sir Alex Ferguson didn't win a trophy for 5 years, but they allowed the manager to come in
Yeah.
and build something for long term. But on the flip side, they said exactly what you've just said. In the modern day, with everything you can flick a switch with, nobody gets time. Nobody gets time. And if you think we're hardly, football managers, but it is people. It's about being able to put a team together, possibly for another individual, but no one gives you that time. And it is a case of you've been in the job for a month. We expect you to start making your first placement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I hear you, and I get it for agencies with non-expertise behind them. I was lucky. My boss was a project assurance manager for Suez. My other boss was a project manager for somewhere else. So that information coming to me, allowing me to go to market was huge. But if you don't have it,
Yeah,
that's up to you to self-invest maybe and find out. I don't know.
I think as well, what my wife said to me about 12 years ago, it goes for both internal and external, is why does nobody do QC on what goes out? And what I mean by that was she works in marketing. There's nobody, when she was at university and now she works for an agency, even though now she's the most senior person in the agency, she still gets someone to double check her work. Nothing goes out with it being double checked. But a lot of agencies, and I will now say agency and be a bit more, we're biased towards or against them. No one second checks a CV that goes out. No one second checks. So actually, you wouldn't have that problem if you had, as you say, those two project managers saying, this is what you're looking for, try this, do that, this is the terminology. But probably also looking at an individual saying, they've got a great skill set. Whereas if I'm just putting out thinking, I'm trying to get some keyword matches here, and I've got the word JV accountant, don't know what it means, and then you pump some CVs out. And I think there's something there, but the next big issue there would be time. People will say, well, we just didn't have time to check Kev's CVs. I was too busy, because we're all so damn busy.
Yeah.
We've got the most automated element of our lives in technology, but we're now more busy than ever. Doesn't equate.
I think there's some, certainly with some agency organisations though, they can be perceived as almost as a bank account by the people who set them up, because they are there purely to make money, purely to generate revenue, and they don't, thankfully I've only ever come across a few of these, but they don't really care how well qualified or not their people are. They just have them there to get the jobs in, to shove the candidates out, to make money, and the more money that they can make, the more money that is creamed off the top by the owners. Luckily those businesses don't tend to last more than a few years at a time. But that's what gives a lot of agencies the reputation that unfortunately it has. And when organisations, as an agency business, if you have a proper setup where I used to work I went back to recruitment a few years ago and worked at a very small business, but they were growing massively and they had a completely different approach. Nobody was bonused. Everybody was paid a decent salary for the job that they did. And rather than have it focused on individuals who were targeted on their own results, everyone was paid a bonus every quarter if the business hit target. And you had a whole pool of resources, and their job was to go out there and find the candidates, do the initial interview, and manage that candidate through the process. They had somebody else who would go out and be the client-facing person and would have the relationship, and they work really closely with their resources. So you knew, and as a resource, you would always go out to see the client at some point. But they worked as such a good team, and they all knew exactly what was going on. And we were so successful because we had this, and we talked about this on the first session, we had this pool of candidates that we kept in touch with, that we would talk to, every 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and it would be a 5-minute chat. It wouldn't be a massive long, it'd just be, hi, how are things? How's it going? Found anything still there? What are you still looking? Blah, blah, blah. And we all knew where everyone was, because as a business, they had set it up to recruit better than recruiters. The owners weren't recruiters at all. and they started it completely differently, and they are now, I think they've got about 120 people now, and they are massively successful, and they still don't bonus, they still, as in individually, and their feedback from their candidates is huge because they care, they genuinely want to treat the candidate as the most important person in that process.
Yeah, and I think I go back, you talk about money, and this young people, personnel coming into this industry now must have to understand that in order for you to maintain and in this game and be respected and trusted, you have to learn your trade.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to learn how to do it right. And trust me, when that time taken to do that, money might not be there right away, but trust will be there, relationships will be there, and then suddenly, if you're looking for that thing, the money might be there because you'll have scaled up somewhere and somebody will recognize you. I worked with Lassie in my recruitment days, and she learned the ropes at the bottom end, and we gave her a chance, and now she's a senior international recruiter for a well-known oil and gas firm. So trust me, it takes time, but if you learn it, you master it, and you invest in yourself, the rewards are there.
Agreed. Guys, I'm aware of the time. Is there any final questions?
So as you say, Henrietta made a comment earlier on saying, always treat others the way I like to be treated. And I think that's the thing to remember, isn't it? When, if you, again, back to that, put yourself in that candidate's shoes, how would I feel knowing that I've been waiting this many weeks for feedback? How would I feel? You know, just flipping that perspective makes a massive difference, which feeds into the candidate experience and the employee reputation as well.
Okay, well, thank you, guys. For those of you who are new, we hope this is the third episode of 7. Our next one will be 9:30 next week. Helen will be flying solo. So it'll be a much better one, of course, then.
You got ninja classes, Brian.
Ninja classes. I'll do another webinar for that. I'll let you know. You'll see it. You might not see it across my LinkedIn. But thank you all. If you have any questions that you want offline, Helen and I are here to kind of answer that. The plan behind the webinars is to really get recruiters together, both internal and external, with HR individuals and hiring managers, and try to improve recruitment as much as we can. So we appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you at 9:30 next week.
Superb.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks very much.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Right. Cheers, Tara.
Bye.